1 second, please. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the April 28th Landmarks Commission meeting. In compliance with notification requirements of Ohio Open Meeting Law and Section 101.021 of the Codified Ordinances of Cleveland, Ohio, 1976, notice of this meeting has been publicly posted. All boards and commissions under the purview of the City Planning Department conducts its meetings according to Robert's Rule of Order. Actions during the meeting will be taken by voice vote. Abstentions from any vote due to a conflict of interest should be stated for the record prior to taking of any vote. In order to ensure that everyone participating in the meeting has the opportunity to be heard, we ask that you keep your microphone on mute and then use the raised hand function, feature before asking a question or making a comment. The raised hand feature can be found in the participants panel on the desktop and mobile version and activated by clicking the hand icon. Please wait for the chair or facilitator to recognize you and be sure you select unmute and announce yourself before you speak. When you finish speaking, please lower your hand by clicking the raised hand icon again and muting your microphone. We will also be utilizing the chat feature to communicate with participants. The chat feature can be activated by clicking the chat button located on the bottom of the WebEx screen. Call-in users can unmute by using *6. All meeting activities are being recorded via the WebEx platform. These proceedings are also being live streamed via YouTube. All requests to speak on a particular matter via our website and email have been considered. We have also received emails from those who have provided written comments on a particular matter. We'd like to call the April 28th Landmarks Commission meeting to order. Mr. Pettit, please call roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I call the roll, I just want to introduce the commission to our new commission member, Anthony Brancatelli is joining us today. He's been appointed by the President of City Council as the new council appointee, one of the new council appointees. He's a former member of the commission. He was a longtime member of Cleveland City Council. And I just want to welcome him back to the commission and look forward to working with him in the next year.
Welcome, Mr. Brancatelli.
Thank you.
Ms. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Bonezzi.
Here.
Mr. Brancatelli.
Present.
Mr. Kalikia. Mr. Dreyer.
Here.
Mr. Edmond.
Here.
Director Wong.
Here.
Mr. Strickland.
Here.
Mr. Tarasik. Ms. Trott.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll begin with our certificates of appropriateness. We will begin with our first applicant located at 12404 Mayfield Road, Building A, B. These are all being presented together, Carl? Or Don?
That is correct.
That's correct. We will have to take 4 actions today, but it's basically one project involving many components.
Okay, well then why don't we jump into it rather than me trying to read off the addresses. I'd like to welcome the applicant. Please unmute your mic, announce yourselves, and tell us about your project.
Hi. Thank you, everybody. My name is Matthew Weimer. I am with WXZ Development. Also with me today is Gregory Soltis of RDL Architects and Peggy Brown, Landscape Architect. And this is our second time coming before you. The project is located in Little Italy on Mayfield Road and also Fairview Court to the rear, which is known as Piggy Street down here. You can see the map showing the location with the star. It's sort of the eastern end of the neighborhood along Mayfield up towards the Alta House. Next slide. I'll have Greg walk through the this part of the presentation now.
Morning, everyone. Thanks again for taking our project today. We'll go through some historic photos. So we did some research to find out what the buildings on Mayfield Road look like. So you can see here in this photo, building 12404 is a 3-story building, 12408, the 2-story building. They both have the red arrows pointing them out. So we could get an idea of what the buildings look like. And I would point out that on 12408, the transom windows and the windows below, we've tried to keep that scale, as you'll see later on, and basically rebuilding that facade. And then in 12404, that building has had multiple additions over time, so we don't know exactly what it looked like at the very beginning, but we did use the style of architecture that you see here as inspiration for its renovation. Next slide. That was a sign that was found in the wall of the building, and you can see it in that photo where it used to be, or they used to sell that there. I don't know if that was like, I think it's on the side of the building as an advertisement.
Mhm.
Next slide. And here are some additional photos that we found showing the building so we can get a better idea of what they used to look like. Next slide. This is built from 1971. And so you can see in this image, by this time, the buildings had been significantly altered. The 3-story building had its ground floor turned into apartments. I believe it, so it's like a beer and wine shop for the 2-story building, but that eventually was turned into apartments and the wall was closed off. But they had already altered the facade by putting some of that stone on it by this time. Next slide. This is the house that exists on Fairview Court. It doesn't look exactly like this anymore, but pretty close to this. But this is, instead of having that overhang with the columns, it's got like steps that go up to the door, but it looks pretty close to this today. Next slide. So existing context, Mayfield Road obviously is a street. It's the primary commercial thoroughfare through Little Italy and consists primarily of mixed use buildings, with the exception of a couple townhouses at the top of the hill, the church at the bottom of the hill. But it's really all mixed use buildings. And these 2 buildings that we're renovating have residential uses on the ground floors, which is inappropriate and not contextual to the street, but obviously was driven by, fluctuations in use and demand. Next slide. And here are some more images along Mayfield Road showing the context. And you can see in the top right photo number 3, what the buildings look like today. So both of the facades have been kind of sealed up and turned into residential apartment units. Next slide.
Solstice?
Yes.
I hate to interrupt you, since you did cover this very well last time. I don't know if we need to go through all the detail, but love to highlight the changes and the main things with the design, since you did a great job last time explaining the context.
Thanks for being so kind and pushing me along. All right. I just mentioned real quickly that, Piggy Street is a very different context. It's got a lot of service uses, garages. It's an alley street. There are some residential houses on the street, but it's a mix of all those things, and it's a completely different context than Mayfield Road. You can see some photos here. Next slide. This is the building at the corner of Fairview and East 125th. Next slide. Some existing context on Piggy Street. And again, you can see it's a very different type of context than Mayfield. Next slide. Garage uses, service uses. Next slide. Same thing. Next slide. And this is the property that we're looking at, or the properties, I should say. And one significant thing to notice is the tree that's in the center that we're going to do our best to save. Next slide. Ariel, next slide. This is what the 3-story building floor plans look like. So what's really noticeable is that the front part of the building and the rear part of the building were additions, and the original building is the part in the center. And right now it's it was I think apartment on the first floor and then apartments on the second and third floors as well. 2 apartments on each floor. Next slide. And then the 2-story building had an apartment in the front and the back on the first floor and the same on the second floor. Next slide. These are some existing condition photos for the 3-story building, which is 12404. Next slide. And this is for 12408. We plan on opening up those openings that have been bricked over. Next slide. And you can see the condition on the front where they skim coated some sort of, concrete material on the facade. So our plan is to try to remove that and replace the brick. Next slide. And some, again, contextual photos of the 2-story building. The entrance is on the side on the alley. Next slide. And that's the alley space that we plan on using as a primary entrance into the courtyard. Next slide. And the property line actually runs through part of that concrete on the left. Next slide. And then here are some photos of what the courtyard currently looks like. At the top, you can kind of see everything all together. The courtyard behind the 2-story building is lower than the one behind the 3-story building. The unit on Piggy Street actually is right behind the 3-story building. It seems like the 2-story building was built later than the other buildings, and they actually dug into the hill in order to create a flat sort of connection to the back. Next slide. And this is of the building, or looking from above or on the Piggy Street building down into the courtyard. Next slide. And existing conditions of the building on Piggy Street. Next slide. And again, existing conditions. Next slide. Interior conditions of the Piggy Street building. Next slide. It was kind of hodgepodge together. Okay, proposed plans. Next slide. So you can see here, we are planning on renovating building A and building B, which you see to the right there facing Mayfield Road, putting commercial uses on the ground floor, demolishing the building on Piggy Street and building a new building that would accommodate parking for all 3 buildings on the ground floor with 2 condominium units above. Building A and building B, their upper floors would also be condominium units, so it would be bringing for sale housing into Little Italy, which is desperately needed. And then connecting the courtyard to create a space for all 3 buildings to kind of a shared space in the middle for them. Next slide. Peggy, do you want to go ahead and speak to the landscape plan?
I can. As Greg stated, that there's a large tree in the middle of that courtyard, and one of the first things out of the client's mouth was that we need to save that tree. So it's about a 36, 40-inch silver maple that's in pretty good shape. So we're making every effort we can to save the tree, to the point of we're using pier construction, grade beam construction on the back of the building C in order to not to have any trenches back there for footers. And it's the same way we're using a deck material. So we're drilling holes and boring holes instead of cutting through the root system with trenches. So on this plan, it starts to illustrate the upper deck. There's 3 different layers through here. You've got the upper deck, even with the level of the garage. Then you step down into a median level deck with an umbrella table and some other sitting areas. The lower area, which is a paved area, which is an entry for building A. There's a ramp access out to the street from that point, so it's ADA compliant. And then you'll step down into the courtyard for building B, the 2-story building with a separate courtyard over there. And one of the interesting issues here was, what do we do with the trash cans? And you drive around Mayfield area, Little Italy area, and all you see are trash cans all over the sidewalks and against buildings and whatever. So we've taken great strides to try and find places and hide those trash cans within the property that they can be wheeled out. So you'll see the doors where they're closeted in some of these concealed areas that we're concealing with some screen fences and what we're calling a light tower. And then the ones for building C will be within the garage at building C. The plant material is... Go on. Did you say something, Matthew?
Yeah, I was just pointing out that the next slide shows some of the things that you're referencing.
Right. So the plant material is all shade tolerant because of the height of buildings in the area and the tree doesn't get a whole heck of a lot of sun. So we're working for a lot of shade plant material in through there. So down at the bottom, you can kind of get a feel for the look we're going for. There's an existing stone wall. There's walls all through the space, but one in particular right to the east of the big tree is a stone wall that's been parched over. We're going to be exposing that stone, tuck pointing as necessary, and then taking the top off another wall that's also the same stone and using that as some accent pieces throughout the space as well. The screen fencing that I was talking about would be similar to what's shown on the wood feature wall down there with a horizontal pattern to it. And then the light wall, which we'll see later in the perspective renderings, would be similar to the light tower effect illustration down there at the bottom. And again, just creating a nodal point in there with a subtle light that we could put on a dimmer so it wouldn't get too bright, and then doing some moonlighting or downlighting out of the big tree to provide some additional light through the space so it's not dark when you're moving through it. There. And this is just another illustration starting to denote some of the change in materials where we've got the decking where it's going to be impacting the tree, and then moving into more of a paver situation down in the other courtyard areas and entry spaces into the buildings.
Right, so thanks, Peggy. So for moving into the floor plans for building 12404, you can just see how we've opened up the entrance on the first floor plan on the lower left and kind of gotten rid of this wall that was between the alley and the door and opened that up so the alley has more visibility because we're going to put an entrance there. Again, like Peggy mentioned, we have ADA access in the alley up to the back, and you can see there's another entrance to the office space in the back. In the back is also the entrance to a little lobby space for the units above. And then on the second floor, you can see the typical unit condition, which is repeated on the third floor. The difference on the third floor is that there would be a lofted space, and it would be opened up a little bit more, so you get more light in there through transom windows. Next slide. This is the concept for reworking the building, and you can see how we've opened up the entrance to the ground floor, also opened up the facade by reglazing, pretty much almost the entire facade on the ground floor, use the balconies that were on the historic building as inspiration for our new balconies, and really defined, the entry on the left with this tower, which is a condition that's kind of repeated throughout Little Italy on many buildings, and then highlighting the residential on the, eastern or really would be western, but on the right side, 2/3 of the building going up and having a change in materials, a metal paneling where you see the green gold, and then a fiber cement board siding, which, siding was what the building was. The building had wood siding originally, so we're proposing a fiber cement siding, recalling what was historically part of the building's architecture. Next slide. This is the view from in the back from the alley, so that's really the stair tower on the left, and then some balconies for the units that face the courtyard on the right. Next slide. This is one of the alley views, which really no one's really going to see. The alleys are not wide unless you stand in there and look up, but this is what that facade looks like. Next slide. And then this is the other alley, and you can see the ramp up to the back and the entrance to the offices and to the residential units in the back there. And then you can see like the stoop up to the front entrance where we've kind of opened up the building and created that tower effect, and then the balconies on the front that kind of overhang, and then the little loft that will have some sliding glass windows that open up on the top. Next slide. And again, here's the materials. Underside of the balconies, we want to use a nice warm wood, fiber cement siding, and then metal panels, and then black aluminum railings, which that's kind of a consistent architectural feature throughout the whole entire project. Next slide. For building 2, the first floor, you can see that we've created a core that has an ADA accessible restroom, a kitchenette space, some storage that would wrap the core for the retail space, the commercial space, and then the entrance to the unit from the alley is also within that core. You can see there on the right off the alley space. On the second floor, you can see the primary floor plan for the entire unit, and then it would have some stairs that go up to a rooftop deck. Next slide. This is what the building will look like from the street. Obviously, it's an elevation, so there's this forced sort of perspective. So you really wouldn't see the rooftop unit from the street. But you can see what we've done is, propose we're going to try to restore the brick on the bottom, restore the historic storefront. We're going to have a special door so that we can get that bigger transom look all the way across that was seen in that historic photo. And then you can see a little overhang on the side that would be further back in the alley that denotes the entry to the residential unit up above. Next slide. In the back, again, we have that black aluminum railing condition for an extended overhang for the commercial unit on the bottom, and then also a balcony for the residential unit. And then you can see the access to the rooftop up above. Next slide. This is the entrance, the main entrance to the residential unit. And this gives a good idea of the depth of that balcony on the back, which we want to be usable. So it's more than 8 feet deep. Next slide. And then this is from the other side, from the other alley, what it will look like. Next slide. And again, materials, historic brick to remain, some copper looking metal panels. We're planning on using 2 different shades of a charcoal gray type paint in order to highlight the moldings around the bays, and also for the new commercial facade that we're going to put back on the bottom of the building, and use anodized black metal for the rooftop. Next slide. And then the new building in the back on Piggy Street, you can see the 5 parking spaces on the ground floor plan below. It also has an elevator and stairs on the back facing the courtyard. So the courtyard is right on these plans. So this would provide parking for all 5 units for all 3 buildings. And then the 2 floors above would each have living floor or floor plans that look like what you see up above for the living units. Next slide. And then, so the concept for this is that it could have been like an old, industrial or commercial type use building that would have been on Piggy Street that has been, refurbished into condominium units. You see the scrillage panels that will be laser cut metal that help provide this layering, because it's a very dense sort of condition where you're kind of right on top of your neighbors. So the scrillage panels, and then there's space behind them, and then glass for the units to provide this layering effect. The garage entry on the bottom will have louvers that let air flow through. Also a man door that will be louvered that gives access to the garage from Piggy Street. On the right-hand side, you can see that the glazing all opens up to the courtyard in the back, and that tower is the stair tower. Next slide. On the one side facing east that faces the backyards of houses on 125th, we have additional scrillage panels, some limited glazing, and then metal paneling. And then on the bottom, you can see, fire code kind of keeps us having no real openings on that side of the building. So there's all this brick that we've selected, a brick that looks like it's an old tumbled brick, like it might have been there for 50 to 100 years. And then you can see the stair tower on the left, and then you can see the stairs that go down into the courtyard, because the courtyard is multi-level. Next slide. And again, for our metals, again, using this kind of green gold, it has an almost like an olive tone metal panels, and then this face brick that would be kind of have a tumbled historic sort of look, and more contemporary Pella windows on this building, whereas on the 2 renovation projects, we're going to use Pella's historic window series. Next slide. I think this was a concept image. That was the original elevation we showed you the first time around, and how we've modified it down on the bottom. Next slide. And here's our materiality, which I pretty much mentioned. This is we went through. Next slide. And this is a section. These are a couple section cuts to really give an understanding of the condition. On the right-hand side, you can see the 3-story building on Mayfield Road. On the left-hand side, you can see the new building on Piggy Street with the parking underneath and the living units above. You can see how it steps down on the top slide. So that's like right through the middle of the courtyard. And then the bottom image actually has the ramp up, so that's cut through the alley. And you can see how there's that wall that goes up to pretty much almost like the backyards of the houses on 125th. But there's about a 4-foot change from bottom to top up there as you move back towards Peggy Street. Next slide. And this is cut through the 2-story building. So you can see how they really kind of dug that out when they built that building in order to keep it at grade with Mayfield Road. So that's a condition we have to deal with as we develop that courtyard. Next slide. This is a rendering that shows, what the buildings will look like on Mayfield Road. You can see that main, entry down the alleyway. So there will be signage on the building there with addresses that show that you can access those units, and that there's also ADA access to the offices behind going through the alley. It's nice. We wanted to do like a warm glowing image so you could also see into the spaces, so you can kind of see how the interior spaces, are designed to really interact and work with Mayfield Road, which is kind of a typical condition on Mayfield Road and in many parts of Little Italy, which is what makes it a great neighborhood. Next slide. This is, if you were coming out of the 3-story building office space, this is what the courtyard would look like. So you can see lighting under the stairs. You can see that tower in the center that Peggy mentioned, which is kind of like almost this sort of knuckle that everything pinwheels off of. So it unifies the entire courtyard, unifies the entire project, all 3 buildings. And you can see the units in the back and the new building that face the courtyard, a low kind of wall to kind of shield your view of the cars. But there's an opening from the garage out here. So that does give ADA accessibility to the courtyard. So someone with a disability still, even though there are stairs and lots of grade change, still has the ability to enjoy the courtyard, whether from up there or down where we're standing right now. They can even be in the lower courtyard if they access that from the other alley on Mayfield Road. Next slide. This is a kind of an aerial view to give a better sense of like how the courtyard all comes together. So you can see on the left, the new building on Peggy Street that has an outdoor sort of terrace for those units looking down into that decking that goes around the tree that Peggy mentioned to protect the tree's roots, steps that go down to that mid-level, and then steps again that would go down to the level where the entrance to the 3-story building is. You can see their balcony terraces kind of hanging off the back of the building there. And then on the right, you get an idea of what that glass box on the top of the 2-story building would look like with the rooftop decks, the balcony in the back, and then the lower courtyard, and then again, that knuckle in the center of everything, holding everything together, that light tower. Next slide. And then this is a view of the new building on Peggy Street. So you can see how we tried to make it feel like it's, was part of the street, and then, it was renovated and used the scrillage panels to create that layering. So someone could still be in that bedroom there. There can be visibility from the street. You can see light and activity through the scrillage panel, but it's not like somebody's private life is being exposed to the street. There's still eyes on the street and that connection to the street, even though the living spaces are above there. And then the louvered garage door and the man door below facing Peggy Street. And I think that's the last, yes.
Thank you for the presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll begin with feedback from the local design review committee.
Good morning. We looked at the project several times conceptually, and we looked at it on April 19th and for a vote. Project, the fully renovated buildings on Mayfield Road, we think is a great addition. Those buildings were kind of in disrepair for years with the property owner, previous property owner. We'd like the idea of how the storefronts will energize the street. And if you remember, with the addition of La Colina and these 2 projects, that whole side of that street has taken on a whole different life from what it was previously as a open lot into storefronts that were used as residences. So we really like the renovations that the development team has made to those two front buildings. The committee really liked the plaza area or garden area between the Fairview Court building and the Mayfield Road buildings. Thought it really linked the two projects together nicely. Excuse me. We really like the idea of the for sale housing. The committee was okay with the demolition of the house on Fairview Court. The one couple comments were that we asked the development team to make sure in the garage on Fairview Court that the turning radius is there is sufficient room to get cars in and out of the garage. But the committee unanimously approved the project on April 19th. So we think they did a really nice job with this, and we really like the idea of restoring the two on Mayfield Road because they could have easily petitioned to demolish those buildings as well. But thank you.
Thank you for the summary. We'll now open the floor to commission members' questions and comments. Who would like to start us off? Oops, sorry. Apologize. I have my screen. Mr. Edmond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm going to repeat a few things that I said last time, but let me start by thanking you, Greg and Peggy, for the very thorough research and what I think is a very thoughtful and sensitive design approach in general. And I particularly appreciate the additional renderings of the courtyard. I think that's going to be one of those extraordinary little urban open spaces, although it's not really a public space. That looks like a wonderful little space to be. So I do have a couple of comments. I think on the Mayfield side, the facade composition and what you're doing with those buildings does feel very appropriate in terms of the massing, the glazing, the relationship to the street. And I think I may have mentioned this last time, but I want to comment on the dark gray and black coloration on both of the buildings. And I think that, we see a lot of that right now. I'm afraid that's going to look dated in a few years. And when there's that much dark massing, it feels a little foreboding, particularly on the three-story building. I think it's probably appropriate for the rooftop level, like we see in this elevation, railings, things like that. But I think you might, I'd like to suggest that you maybe consider some different coloration on both the clapboard siding and the bay windows here. And I did actually, on this elevation, I did want to ask the copper metal roof panels on the bay windows, does that have like a coating on it, or is that allowed to naturally patinate?
It's not an actual copper, so it's a metal panel that's made to look like copper, so it will not turn green.
And then I wanted to turn to the Piggy Street side. Again, I really appreciate what you're doing with the concept and I think the tumbled brick adds a nice both sense of age, but also a nice texture to the facade because you have these pretty strong masses, and I think that the tumbled brick helps that. And I really like your concept of the screened layering. However, I feel that the graphics that you are showing in the screen, the very large scale of the graphics, kind of undermine that layering and really make the screen really the prominent plane of the building. And I'm afraid that it would also obscure the views of the residents from their balconies. And it also, because of that, the boldness of those graphics really makes it feel like in that street rendering where you're looking down the street, like that is sort of the brow over the street as opposed to the layered look that I think is what you're trying to go for. So I like the concept, but I think the particular execution of the graphics on these panels kind of undermines your stated intent, which I like the stated intent. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for those. We'll definitely take a look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond. Mr. Brancatelli.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman. A couple quick questions. One, and I think if Peggy can answer this, I'm not sure if I heard correctly, on the large tree that you're trying to save, has that been looked at by an arborist and had an evaluation on the condition of that tree?
We haven't talked to an arborist, no, but in looking at the tree in detail out there, the root system seems to be fine. I don't see any evidence of rot, and I've only seen one branch that looks like it could be pruned. Everything else seemed real viable, and it's got a good head on it. Didn't seem to be broken out very much at all, except for that one branch.
Okay, you're a lot of the design element around that, you're spending a lot of time around that, so I just want to make sure that that's not, that's a healthy tree. And as Carter mentioned a little bit on the laser cut panels, again, Greg, is that, what is the material again on that?
Matthew found a guy who could laser them, but they'll probably be aluminum, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, because I just curious on, again, a kind of a weathering question and how those will weather and look over time.
We want to have them finished to have this green gold color. So if they're anodized, I think it'll weather pretty well.
Okay, great. And then I'm not sure, as I'm a new appointment, generally when I was in the council seat, I would ask, do you have council approval as the council person reviewed this? And I don't know if that's a question for Ray or if the council person has reviewed this.
I'm sorry. He's aware of the project, and there was no opposition from him. Well,
Great. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Edmonds really paved the way for my comments. I also feel that there is too much charcoal gray or black. He said exactly what I'm about to say. We see a lot of that. I don't know that all of this black is appropriate for historic districts. I'm looking at historic photos and they're black and white, so I have no real firm idea of the colors that are used, but I suspect that the black was not really a dominant color in these historic areas. The two bay windows on the two-story building, in all of the historic photos, the bays are painted a lighter color, so they stand out from the building, and these lighter colors also bring out the details of the bay windows. And I would like to see something more along that historic line. On the back of the building, I like the metal panels, but I also agree. I think the design could be something a little more delicate. And I'm not sure if there's other patterns incorporated into buildings nearby that could be used as a guide that could be made more abstract, or just again, I think the concept is neat. It's just I'd like to see it executed with a little more finesse, a little more delicate pattern. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would say for your comments and Mr. Edmonds' comments that we are continuing our research on. I've learned a lot about historic storefronts in the past couple months. So we're continuing our research and trying to find, appropriate historic colors, that Sherwin-Williams, for example, has in their palettes, and also refining the design on the panels on the back.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Director Hong.
Good morning, all, and good morning, team. Thank you again for your presentation. And after sort of my first few months of orientation, this is actually my first Landmarks Commission where I get to come on and vote. And I believe the commission members will soon learn that the context that I'm kind of coming from regarding, you know, the handling of historic structures is that my family comes from Taiwan, and Taipei has this really unique mix of both historic structures that have been modernized in the process. And so my perspective is, you know, preserving the structures, but often, you know, looking at how it can be, you know, maybe not as much literally historic with coloring and all that, but how there are ways that we can see both the past and the present come together. And so I support the colors that are listed here, and I actually really liked the olive 3D modeling. To me, it speaks of the branches of the tree, so it kind of refers back to the graphic of the tree in the center, and the courtyard, which again also speaks very much to sort of my heritage, where there have been buildings in the past that have been built around these beautiful interiors. And so I have appreciated the sort of touch around how the panels speak to the tree in the courtyard. And I overall like the presentation, and I would be happy to approve as presented.
Thank you, Director Huang, and thanks for recognizing the tree, the reference to the tree, because I forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
I did not pay her to say that.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to first start by commending the applicant and the architectural team for this fantastic project and the vision that the owner has in rehabilitating these historic structures and replacing the one on the back. In terms of the facades on Mayfield Road, Building B, the two-story building, clearly is a significant restoration of an historic building. I don't get that sense when I look at the three-story building. It looks like a totally modern building with no reference whatsoever to the historic fabric. So I certainly have a problem with that. I don't see why the focus was on clearly a historic restoration of Building B, and the same approach was not taken with Building A. So personally, I would like to see some semblance, recognition that it still is an historic structure represented in the renovation of the facade. In terms of the back building, I had questioned during the concept phase what impact the western elevation of Building C would have on the adjacent neighbor. And it looks like just a big blank monolithic brick wall. And I wondered if some articulation could be added just to break up the monotony and its impact on the western neighbor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. Those are great. To deal with the wall first, Matt and I are looking at different brick types, or even, you know, by fire code, if we could potentially introduce some glass block into the wall in order to break it up and also allow light into the unit. So that is under study. And the stair tower that you see, those aren't actually windows either, because by fire code, we're not allowed to have windows. So those are just, gosh, I'm always forgetting the word where you have glass and you paint the back of it, but it's a solid wall behind it. But we did that. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I don't know why I always blank on that word. But so those are spandrel panels to start to try to break up the geometry of the stair tower. And we are looking at that for the wall as well. With reference to your comments on the Mayfield Road, the approach we took, you know, in doing, we did a lot of research and read a lot of the guidelines from the Secretary of Interiors. And so the recommendations from the Secretary of Interiors was that, you know, if you have a lot of context or a lot of existing photos for a building and a lot of its existing architecture left than trying to do a full historic renovation or was the approach. And then for a building that's been added on to, and then, you don't necessarily know exactly, like, for example, we don't know exactly what the facade ever really looked like because, in its current condition with this addition that was added on Mayfield Road, because we don't have a photo. So the Secretary of Interior's, recommends that a contemporary interpretation is an appropriate way to move forward with that. So in this instance, we wanted to reference the historic by keeping the balconies and reopening up the glaze or the ground floor with all that glazing, although we don't know exactly what that looked like. So that was why we decided to take, this approach with this building. We did follow the Secretary of Interior's guidelines, with regards to how we approach each of the buildings. And I would also add that, besides the balconies, the material that we use as far as like the majority of the building is going to be covered with lap siding, which is also a throwback or a reference, a nod to the fact that in all the photos we have, the building was covered with siding. And we wanted to open up the corner. Carl, can you go to the rendering of on Mayfield Road? And the reason for that is that the alley is going to really be the primary entrance to almost everything for these three buildings. So we don't want that alley to feel hidden or secluded. We want it to feel open. So by opening up that corner and, using this building that we don't have the exact historic photos for, using this building to accentuate that corner with the tower, open it up on the bottom so you can see entry into the courtyard. That will allow people to say, oh, that's the entry if I want to go back to the residential units, or to have, access to the offices in the back, if I'm in a wheelchair. So that was our thinking, but I appreciate your comments.
And Carl,
Looking at this elevation, it seems to me that the storefront is represented a little differently with the masonry base to accommodate the change in elevation.
Which one? On the two-story building?
No, on the 3-story that we're looking at right here.
Oh, do you mean underneath the windows where there's this sort of concrete or stone base to the building?
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't see that in the other elevation, so I like having that masonry base below the new storefront.
That's an existing condition, so that will be there.
And you don't have any historic reference in terms of what this, how far back were you able to research and find any photos of this?
Well, if you go, Carl, can you go to the beginning where we have the historic photos? So the early 20th century are the photos we have, but by then the building had already been altered. Because, so there's an actual like stone, like limestone or sandstone sort of foundation walls in the building. And then on both the front of the building and the back of the building, it changes because they added onto it. So this is, so there.
And if you could go forward a few slides, you just had one that, there you go.
Right here.
So.
And so you're saying this front elevation, that was an addition? Originally,
Yes.
Building set back from the street?
Yes. And by something like at least 4 feet, if not more, right, Matt?
Mm-hmm.
So they added this whole front facade to the building. So we don't have any pictures of what the building looked like before they added this like facade on the front that's about 4 feet deep. And by this photo, which is the most, detailed photo we have, it's 1971. The entire facade has already been, changed, where they closed up the ground floor, turned it into an apartment, rebuilt those balconies. You can see the spindles have, I don't know, it looks like some neo-colonial detailing or what have you, which, and you guys are better at the historic stuff than me, so if I'm using the wrong words, but you know what I mean. And, the older photos show, balconies, of course, but, they were more, from what you can make out, they were much simpler, where, so, and you can't really see exactly what the ground floor was, but you can see that it probably was open probably was a retail storefront. So
One
that's
thing
why.
I'll point out that I think you mentioned before, Greg, if you could go forward a couple, Carl, back to the 70s image. Thank you. It was really difficult to establish any sense of symmetry from the ground floor moving up to the residential floors, given the existing condition with those ground floor windows. They have a more residential feel to them. The scale is a bit off. So opening those spaces up to create some more activity and vibrancy at the street level and allowing people to see into the space more, I think is a more sensitive approach to the neighboring structures and certainly the surrounding context itself. And again, opening up the entryway there, similarly, same goal in mind.
All right, so in this elevation, though, clearly on the second and third floors, you have, it looks like two doors that open onto that balcony and then two long rectangular windows. So you have 4 distinct openings at each balcony. And you were not able to duplicate or replicate that type of layout.
We still have four distinct openings, but because when they modified this building, they turned it into 2 units per level. So, there's the very thin unit that goes front to back on either side of the building on both of those floors. And we're now turning into 1 level, like 1 unit on each floor. So we don't necessarily need the 2 doors, and we don't even know if these 2 doors were original or when they modified the building later in the 20th century, if they added those 2 doors, but we still did replicate the 4 openings all the way across. So we did keep the 4 openings. We still kept, balconies on the units, although we did, highlight the corner to denote entry, not just for the building, but also for the alley space.
All right, Carl, could we go forward to the proposed elevation to see how that's represented? Yeah, obviously it's a totally different interpretation of the original 4 opening.
Right.
So I've made my comments. No.
Okay.
So I'm
It
anxious to hear
was a good discussion.
the rest of my commissioner.
And I certainly appreciate your comments and understand the point that you're making. I will say this is an odd structure. It's unique in a sense because there were additions at different points in time. So trying to get down to the original structure and character of the building, it's tricky. But we're trying to be as mindful as possible, again, of the surrounding context and what this structure can contribute to the neighborhood.
Thank you for the questions, Mr. Strickland. I'll just interject my feedback. I think much has been said already. I think this is a great restoration development for this area. I think taking some buildings that have clearly been underappreciated and bringing them back to their vigor. I don't mind the black colors or the dark colors as much as some of the commission members, but I would say that my only reservation is this building that I personally would appreciate the balconies being the full, not modified or reduced. That the continuous balconies similar to what they have was just my personal opinion that I would like better. Because these buildings are so small that I think it's making this, the corner highlight is effective, but it's taking away a little bit, in my personal opinion, from the building itself. It's it's a very simple building in its current state, and I personally like that. But I like the development of the plans and how you're repurposing the buildings, the courtyard. And then on building 3, I would have to agree with Mr. Edmonds' comments on the panels. I really do like the panels and the approach. The scale of the panels, I think in the renderings looks beautiful, but when in reality, I think that pattern might be overbearing.
Thank you.
So those are my comments. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you. I have a question, just a quick question about the windows in the 3-story building. Are they one single sheet of glass?
Oh,
They
these
divided. They don't look divided, so I just wanted to ask about those windows.
yeah, currently they're designed as casement windows.
Okay. And they would be a single sheet of glass.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to throw this out, maybe to reference a historic look, and I don't think they have to be a double hung window where, each pane is the same size, but, maybe dividing them, even with 1/3 and 2/3 or something like that might more reference it being a historic building, because obviously they didn't use single sheets of glass like that back in the early 20th century. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, got noted.
Thank you.
I'm taking notes for all your comments, just so you know, so I'm not.
Other questions or comments from the commission? Would someone like to put forward a motion?
Madam Chair, I just want to remind the commission that we have to act on all 4 elements of this project. And I would just suggest that we go in the order that they're listed on the agenda today.
Great suggestion. Sorry about that, Don. So we'll start with, would someone like to make a motion on building A, the renovation and additions to, Carl, do you mind going to the correct image? Is this building A? Or is this building B?
That is building A. It's the building
All
to
right.
the west on Mayfield.
All right, so would someone like to make a motion on building A? Mr. Edmond?
I would like to move that the proposed building be approved with the provisions that the designers consider different color options, potentially subdividing the glass lights and extending the balcony width across the whole facade.
So we have a motion with recommendations, not conditions, correct, Mr. Edmond?
Correct.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion?
A quick question, if I can, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So when these recommendations, those just get resolved then through the administration when they bring back for their final construction drawings?
Correct. They would be resubmit and work with staff.
Okay,
They're not
great.
requirements though for submitting for permit.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Any further discussion? Great, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yeah.
Mr. Edmond,
Yes.
Director Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion for the renovation addition of building B? Mr. Strickland?
Madam Chair, I'll move to approve the project as presented with consideration of changing the colors of the bay windows in the storefront to a lighter color that might better represent the historic palette.
Thank you for the motion. Do we have a second?
I have a question.
Do we want to finish the process and ask it during the question period? Is that, or does it affect the motion that's on?
Well, I have a question about the motion.
Well, there is a motion on the table, so we have to have it second. There can be discussion. It can be revised.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
So we have a motion, we have a second. All right, Ms. Anderson, your question?
Regarding the colors on the bay windows, is that a stipulation in this motion?
A recommendation and not a requirement? Is that what you're
Correct.
asking?
That is correct. That was the intent of my motion.
So a recommendation to consider a lighter color for the bays in the storefront versus black.
I would support the motion if it's a stipulation, not a recommendation.
Not a, you want, you support if it's a condition that they have to change, reconsider the
Correct.
color? Mr. Strickland, do you feel it should be a requirement or do you want to stay with recommendation?
Just a recommendation, my motion.
Okay. It was Mr. Edmond, did you second that motion?
I did, and I agree with the recommendation.
Okay, so we have we'll stay with a recommendation for consideration of changing the color. Any further discussion? Right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Madam Chair, I just want to clarify who made the second.
Mr. Edmond,
It
Correct.
was Mr. Edmund, is that correct? It wasn't Mr. Brancatelli?
I think we both said it at the same time.
Okay.
So either
Okay,
way.
just want to be sure. Thank you. Ms. Anderson,
No.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Director Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 7 votes to 1.
All right, thank you. We'll now move on to the demolition of the house on located at 12405 Fairview Court or Piggy Street. Would someone like to make a motion? Mr. Edmond,
I move that the demolition be approved as presented.
thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Brancatelli. Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Director Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move on to our last item, which is the new construction of Building C. Would someone like to make a motion? Oh, sorry, Carl. Would someone like to make a motion? Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move to approve Building C, the building at 12405 Fairview Court, as presented with a recommendation that the west elevation be studied to provide some, as code allows, glass block openings or some articulation in that elevation, and to study a lighting up, I guess, of the graphics on those metal panels to make them more open as a recommendation.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Director Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion for the new construction passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We look forward to seeing your project move forward.
Thanks, guys.
Likewise. Have a
Have a
great
great day.
You too.
Take care.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next applicant, located at 2227 Payne Avenue, lobby renovation and elevator addition for the Norma Hare Women's Center.
Morning, Commission Chair and Commission members. Brian Grambort with Hedy DeFrancisco and Siebold, presenting the Norma Hare Women's Center lobby renovation and elevator addition. I can go over these or skip some of the context if you would prefer.
You can do just a very quick, and since we do have just the highlights of the existing conditions and then into your design. And since we just saw you recently, just, if there's been revisions or developments would be wonderful.
Sure. This is the main facade on Payne Avenue, the original Sidney Hillman Memorial Building on the right. And then what we've been informed is the Fox Film Building on the left. Those two were joined by a link connector in 2009, I believe. Next slide. The parcel in question. The next few slides are context images of adjacent buildings, which I think we can skip over. One more. So the original historic facade on the top right, after the link building was, the connector building was constructed and the building was made accessible in 2009 on the bottom right, and you can see the original anodized aluminum openings replacing kind of those equal sized doors in the three center vertical panels, and then the current condition on the left hand side where the anodized aluminum frames still exist, but the doors have been replaced with hollow metal doors. Next slide, please. The first element that we're going to be replacing is the glass block. Photos on the right are the existing glass block, fluted with 10 parallel ribs and installed in a quarter turn fashion. The 10 rib glass block no longer exists and is no longer manufactured. We're proposing a 13 rib glass block of the same size, 8x8, installed in the same quarter turn pattern in all 5 of those kind of vertical openings along the main historic front. Next slide, please. We are going to be replacing the existing doors and frames, which you see in the bottom left here. And based on previous comments, the next slide will show the proposed orientation. I'm sorry, actually slide after this, but this shows the material that we're proposing for both the frames and the doors. This is a stainless steel door and frame, which will also include that fascia piece above the door, the header, which would be continuous. This is a platinum nickel, which we feel better and more closely matches the the original bronze and the stone. It's more complementary to those materials. If you go to the next slide, this is the proposed orientation of the new doors. So we're creating a symmetrical orientation as opposed to the asymmetry in the existing door layout. Based on previous comments from design review, we are maintaining the 10-inch bottom rail across both the door panels as well as the side lights and the center fixed panels, as you see in the line drawing below. We also have the doors themselves are medium style, so they have a 6-inch top rail, and we're also maintaining that same horizontal band, trying to be more consistent in the layout, similar to the original. Next slide, please. This is just a color rendered version to show what it would look like. Next slide, please. The light fixtures that we're replacing, you see on the left, are essentially emergency wall packs, and we're proposing a new up-down fixture, and this fixture would match the material, the stainless steel material of the doors and frames. So trying to minimize the number of different material finishes on the project. Next slide, please. The platform itself, the stone platform, has experienced quite a bit of water infiltration and damage over the years. It is not accessible anymore, even though there is a ramp, many trip hazards. So we're going to be removing that, replacing it with a new concrete platform and concrete steps, but still with stone facing. So on the bottom right-hand photo, you see in blue, yellow, and kind of a reddish orange, some public art that had been made specifically for this building in this specific location. We're removing those, salvaging them for the owner, but then installing some new stone facing along that front, and then also on the risers on the steps. And the railing that you see actually in the last photo in the bottom right hand, we're salvaging that and reinstalling it. So there's no change in material there. And next slide, our trash cans we're proposing at this location to try to minimize the debris around the site. Next slide, please. And some interior work that will not affect the fenestration or the openings or the glazing on the main facade. We're also going to be doing some repair work to the historic terrazzo flooring and sills on the interior. Next slide, please. So the other part of this scope is to add a full service elevator on the back of the building. So the plan that you see, everything in kind of a light tone, is the existing building, and the orange space outside of the building in the courtyard is where the new full service elevator will be installed, and a 1-story elevator lobby. Next slide, please. This is that plan, and you see the elevator on the top of that addition, connecting to the historic building. Next slide, please. So the center photo is the corner at which that elevator hoistway will be, and what you see on the left is the image, is the section through the elevator hoistway and that link looking at the historic building. So based on the size of the hoistway, we will be intersecting the center window of the 3 that you see in the photo. We will be infilling that, but still maintaining the brickwork around those openings, and we'll be setting that brick infill back to match the plane of the main elevation. It won't be pulled out to the front of those brick details. And then the elevation on the right shows that we're going to be maintaining the brick along the first floor, just like the link, and our intention is to match that lighter brick. And then the hoistway, which extends above that and above the link itself, would be would match the metallic silver corrugated metal siding. One of the comments was from previous design review was on the louver that you see on the right-hand elevation. Previously, it was drawn incorrectly as overlapping the hoistway. That is, we've verified it is out of the hoistway, so there won't be any issue overlapping that. And the final slide is the materials. So the infill material on the historic building on the right, we would match that, and we are matching like I mentioned, the metallic silver and the brick on the existing link building. That summarizes the project. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll begin with feedback from the local design review committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This went to the Downtown Flats Design Review Committee on April 14th. They approved it. Their one condition, as the architect mentioned, was that the inset window infill to be flush with the main wall at the elevator addition.
Excellent, thank you. We'll open up the floor then for questions and comments from the commission. Who would like to start us off? Mr. Edmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. Could we be reminded of our comments from last time we saw this?
Don or Carl, do you have those at hand?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think generally the commission had no issues with the elevator addition. There was a desire to have some consistency of materials on the front elevations. There was a recommendation to use stainless everywhere, like a Kynar finish. There was a preference for stainless steel again, single leaf in the two sides, double door in the center, medium style doors. Those are basically the comments I have from the notes from the meeting.
Sounds like those have been pretty well addressed. Thank you.
Yes, I think so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Edmond and Mr. Pettit, for making sure we knew the comments from previous review. Other questions or comments from the commission? While we wait for others to comment, I'll just interject mine now. I want to just say thank you to the applicant for listening to the feedback that you received. I think, unifying the materials across the front elevation really helps to make the entry actually more understated, which was the original intent of the building. So I think, it's a great, very light touch to the building based on the materials that you have selected. And I think the changes you've made to the doors and the windows have helped, once again, bring it back to the spirit of what the original design was supposed to be, but meeting the modern requirements.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the commission? Or I'm sorry, Mr. Gambort, did you have something to respond?
No, I was just saying thank you.
Oh, sure. Other questions or comments from the commission? Quiet group today. Would someone like to make a motion then?
Michelle, I move that we approve the project as presented.
Excellent. Thank you for a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
And that Mr. Brancatelli?
Yes.
All right. Learning your voice. Just give me a meeting or two. All right. So we have a motion. We have a second. Further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion to approve as presented passes unanimously.
Excellent. Thank you. We look forward to seeing your project move forward.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Apologize. Trying to find the call. We'll move on to our last applicants, the new construction of the student residence phase 1 and 2 on the Case Western Reserve campus.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair and Commission members. Quick question, do you want us to go through the entire presentation or a quick intro and highlight our modifications?
Thank you for asking that. I think a brief overview and then highlighting your modifications would be great. We do have new commission members, so a little background, but I don't think we have to go to the detail you did last time since we just saw you so recently.
Great, thank you. My name's Joanne Brown. I'm with Case Western Reserve University. Also on our team today are Chris Panicki, our director, and Rick Pruden, a project manager, as well as William Ron and Associates, the architect of record on the project. We have Sindhu Meyer and Ryan Hogan. With that, what I'd like to do is just a quick little background. Our student population has been growing over the past probably 4 to 5 years, and we've gotten to a population where our residential halls to support the students are not adequate. So what we're looking at doing is adding 600 new beds to the south side of our campus, and this would be primarily for our second-year students. Next slide, please. Next slide. The way that our current student housing is set up is we have a north residential village, which you see at the top of your screen, and then we have a south residential village, which you see in the yellow circular area on the lower portion of the screen. Next slide. We are proposing to put these two buildings on a current parking lot that is next to our south dining facility called Fribley Commons. That is a project that we did just renovate, finished that up last year, and it has capacity for additional students. This is a parking lot that we'll show later how we are reallocating the spots, but this is the actual location. So no buildings will be demolished for this work. Next slide, please. This is just to indicate that this is in following with our master plan that we did in 2015 that did recognize the fact that the university was planning additional growth in the student body. What we're talking about today in this presentation is phase 1 and 2, which are 2 buildings, 600 beds apiece, or 600 beds in total. Next slide. As I mentioned, this is for our second-year students. We have first-year students that come and all reside on our north side, and then programmatically we like to have the second-year students reside on our south side. We are a little bit of a elongated campus, and this way we get the students to experience both the north and south sides, as well as many students in second year are already allocating or determining their majors, and the Case Quad is very convenient to the south side. We do have the project goal to open in the fall of 2024. Next slide. This is just a very quick project schedule. We did start this project prior to COVID hitting, and we put it on a pause. We're now going through the design completion, as well as hoping to begin construction in August of 22 with a 2-year build out so that in August of 24 we can welcome new students. Next slide. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Sindhu Meyer, who's going to talk a little bit more about the original change that we made from January. And then what we'll do is we'll start to talk about building materiality. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joanne. We had been meeting with your group and with the Little Italy group since January 2020. And as Joanne said, there was a pause. And initially, we had this layout where the massing was having a little more, a couple more beds on the Murray Hill side. And with your recommendations, we lopped off the area in the dashed red box and attached it to the Hill building to reduce the massing along Murray Hill and make it more in keeping with the size and scale of the neighborhood. And then we further designed, as you can see right here, and then we worked towards developing the elevation along Murray Hill to make it as residential and in keeping with the pedestrian feel. We worked on the landscaping. We built up the 4 porches for the individual adults who will be living and managing these students along Murray Hill. So they will be your neighbors as you go forward. And we did work on the elevations to break it up so it does not seem to be a large building along this pedestrian and residential street. Next slide. I know most of you have already seen this presentation, so I'll be quick. The ground floor has our public amenities and 4 apartments for the adults who manage the students and the building here. Next slide. The 600 beds are split between the 2 buildings. The Murray building is along Murray Hill Road and the Hill building is up against the hill. And the split is 172 on Murray and 428 on Hill. Again, dealing to address the issue of keeping the massing as small as possible on Murray Hill side and still maintaining the program requirements. Next. As you go up the building, the floor plan starts to repeat with bedrooms and common spaces. And this is the existing context. We're building on a parking lot on the Case campus in the South Residential Village. We're adjacent to the Fribley Hall, which was recently renovated, and we took some of the cues for the finishes of our building to be in alignment with Fribley Hall as well as the neighboring buildings. Next slide. We did walk up and down Little Italy to get a feel of the neighborhood, the scale, the context, where the importance of front porches and setbacks from the street. Next slide. And we also looked at some of the newer buildings that were approved by the city and how they work to break down scale with massing, material, and detailing. Next slide. This is Fribley, some bigger pictures of the building recently renovated by Case Western, and it'll be our immediate neighbor for the buildings we're proposing. This is our elevation, and as you can see, this is the Murray building, and if you go from left to right, you've got the facade broken up into 4 major pieces with curtain wall in between. We've set back the taller part of the building and put in a different color brick. One of the comments in the previous discussion was that the 2 bricks seem to be quite different, and so later in the slideshow we'll show you the actual brick selection, and I hope you'll agree with us that they are not that far apart from each other and they work quite well together. At the ground floor, you'll see the front doors of 4 apartments where the adult members of this complex and their families will live, so they will be your neighbors as they move in. And on the far right is the multi-purpose room, which will host various student events and educational events as well. Next slide. This is a view from Murray Hill Road looking at our building from the north end, and you can see our undulating elevation to help break up the scale. Next slide. Here's a head-on facade elevation of what you'll see from Murray Hill Road, and so this is how we've broken up the massing with the brick detailing as well as curtain wall to break up the longer elevation. And then below it, another comment was dark gray brick, the dark gray stone may look a little too dark, but we'll show you the actual stones we're looking at, and they're actually quite medium, so it won't look this dark. Next slide. Here's one of the front porches for the apartments. And then the multi-purpose room on the corner that will be an inviting beacon for the district and also help put eyes on the street. Thanks. This is our nighttime rendering. We're being very cognizant about night sky and light pollution, but we did want to make sure that the area is lit well for safety and student comfort.
And I believe that was another item that the commission had asked about and was concerned about.
Mm-hmm. So here you can see this is the brick that we call the orange brick on the rendering, and the red brick that's set back and covering the taller part of the building. And the black striping is denoted with this darker brick here. And then this is the medium gray stone, and then the base has a darker stone on it. And that's a 12-inch base generally. Next slide. Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about zoning. We are also, as we go down the design path, we are going down the path of a zoning map amendment. Currently, our site is zoned MFC1, which reduces our front yard setbacks as well as our height and massing. We are surrounded by MFC2 and MFE3. We've had discussions with the city. The city of Cleveland does not grant front yard variances. Therefore, it was suggested that we pursue a zoning map amendment, which we are doing through zoning and planning at the same time as we're going through this process. Part of the back of this site will be taking up some of that C2 zoning as we move up the hill. Next slide. This is just by doing the zone map amendment, we will be able to become fully compliant and not need any variances. That's why the recommendation of the city was to follow that pathway. Next step. In these, again, I'm just going to breeze through these. If you go to the next slide, it's just a little larger space, and this is just showing where our front yard setbacks are. Within the map amendment process, we're looking to have along Murray Hill between a 5-foot and a 20-foot, I believe, front yard setback, and that would be stipulated in the final verbiage that will go through council. Next slide. This just indicates by that red line how we're now in compliance with our height. There is an element of the zoning code that allows you to, for every step of frontage you step back, you can gain height. Next slide. Parking. So I wanted to talk a little bit about parking in general. So this slide, what this shows you is lot 5 in the center, the red or the darker orange, and how we would reallocate those current parking spots to the adjacent lots around the area. So with the new building and the replacement of parking lot 5, we need 328 spots. What we did is we took a picture right now of those existing orange parking lots around, and you can see their capacity and then how many open spaces they have, which is 363, which is over what we have right now. And that, understanding that this is a photo or a picture just of today, we do have the ability to reserve as many spots in that area. So we can keep those 328 open and available for anyone who was parking in lot 5, which primarily were student and some faculty, or I'm sorry, students and staff. There was also a lot of discussion about the front street parking that runs along the site. Next slide. Let's see if there's anything in that. Okay, but this is a video so prior to this. So along Murray Hill there are street parking spots that are allocated by the city of Cleveland, and there was a lot of discussion what would happen to those. So we did work with Little Italy as well as our folks in our parking and our traffic group, and I'm happy to say that we are, for the duration of this project, we're going to relocate the permit parkers along the street into lot 47, which is the lot that is accessible by Erie Road as well as behind our current art studio. So we will not lose those parking spots, and those will be allocated to Little Italy residents during that time. And then we do have a walkthrough, Sindhu. If I don't know if that will work, Carl.
Are you able to give Ryan the presenter privilege and then he can share the video?
I am not.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, with that, we did have just a video that showed the pedestrian experience along Murray Hill that really helped with understanding that view of the massing. And with that, we'll turn it back over to the commission.
All right, thank you for the very thorough presentation. We'll begin with feedback from the local committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We've been working with Case on this project, it seems, for several years now. We've been involved during the whole process with staff meetings, conceptual reviews. We hosted a community meeting on April 17th that Joanne referenced before our design review committee took action on April 18th. The meeting was attended by about 20 stakeholders. Comments focused more on parking, logistics during construction, conditions of the Murray Hill Brick Road after construction, and trees. Not many comments revolved around design. Case is committed to look at solutions to these problems, and LIRC will be involved in this process the whole way. As one of the things, we're going to ask the Board of Zoning Appeals to, when they approve the zoning, to not allow people in those residents in those addresses to obtain residential permit parking passes. So this way they cannot take parking up for residents on Murray Hill. During our initial meetings with Case, we were always concerned about how the project affected Murray Hill Road and how it would look from the street. And I think that the group has done a very nice job of making it where it seems to fit. They've kept the front 4 stories on the front. They added some height to the back. One of the issues we always had too was with the upper floor in the back, how it looked, and I think they've done a nice job of increasing the glazing and making it somewhat kind of disappear when you're on Murray Hill or across the street. The other thing that the committee really liked was the picture you have up now is like the entrance area, the glass structure on the corner there. And we thought that really would work nicely with Fribley Commons, which was just redone about a year ago. So the committee was very happy with the changes made. Also, one of the things we talked about was the massing on the other side of this building. It was kind of like an L shape and it was really bulky. They've kind of narrowed that down and put more glazing into it. So all in all, the committee was very impressed by the project. They voted unanimously to approve it, and we look forward to working with Case on the logistic things of effects during construction, parking, trees, and the brick street. So we did approve it unanimously. And yes, former Councilman Brancatelli, I did talk to Blaine Griffin, and he's aware of what, and he's fine with everything to this point. Thank you.
Thank you for that summary. We'll now open up the floor to the commission for questions and comments. Who would like to start us off? Mr. Brancatelli.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Ray, for that update on council support. And I'm not sure if Don or Carl or maybe Ray can answer this. When was the last time that the zoning in this area was upgraded for the uses that it's showing now?
There's not been a full zoning review. Actually, our organization, no, the zoning is the same as it's been forever. We are actually finishing a study that we're looking at an overlay district and design review guidelines based in that district. So we're almost to the finish line, but we had delays because of COVID and a few other things. But we are looking at the whole area.
Okay, yeah, great. So I don't recall when I was on council that I saw zoning changes coming to this area. So I think more was just a question of how smoothly that process will go through. But it sounds like you've gotten local support already, and folks understand the importance of this and that the zoning's appropriate. I do like the brick contrast, the different colors. I think between the step back building, it does really create a different feel. And then just lastly, and I'm not sure if Joanne can answer this question. So you're going to temporarily relocate those permits to a different lot. So would folks be returning back to those same permitted along the parallel along Murray Road, along Murray Hill?
Yeah, yes. Whoever would hold those city permits would have those parking spots back. Yes.
Great. Yeah, this is fabulous. Much needed apartments for the students. This is a great project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for Mr. Brancatelli. Mr. Edmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of comments. I think the relationship to the street that you've created, the way the setback varies and that and just that relationship is really good and vibrant. And I think a real key piece to that is those porches, which is a real Little Italy thing and a Cleveland thing. And it's something you don't typically see in student housing. So that's a really nice touch. I also think the exterior spaces you've created around the intersection with Adelbert and the way the very glassy sort of commons room building, you'll see that as you come up Adelbert, which currently is, there's the nice new building, but it's never been a great approach into Little Italy from the campus. And I think between this and the open space you've created next to it, it'll be a much more gracious way to come from Adelbert, from the campus into Little Italy. One question is, I believe the last time we saw this, you had indicated you were considering a Cold Spring granite for the first floor, but obviously you've ended up with a different gray color, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about your process and decision on that. Thank you.
Okay. We did have samples of Cold Spring granite, and we found that it was almost too white, and so we like this medium gray better. And it, this is a small piece, but it has some nice veining in it, and we're planning to use larger slabs, so we think it'll be a nice rich stone to go on the ground floor of the building.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond. Additional questions or comments from the commission? I'll interject mine now while we wait to see if there's others. I do like the project. I do agree and like how you've now created sort of the portal or the identity for the campus, this campus from Adelbert, between the renovation of this piece here that's on the screen and the adjacent building. I do like how you stepped through the building. My only comment is similar to before, is that I appreciate your change in color of the brick. I just wonder if it's enough to really have the impact and that differentiation that you're trying to achieve. So I'd encourage you to study your brick colors on site to see if there is enough contrast in those two bricks to break down the scale the way you're trying to. And then the change to this granite I think is nice, and just want to make sure the scale of it isn't counterproductive to, what you're doing of trying to break down the scale of the overall buildings compared to the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. We are in the process of developing larger scale brick mock-ups. We're actually, Case Western is coming to our office in early May. We're hoping to show them smaller samples to get the grout colors right and then build 4x4 foot mock-ups on site and on wheels to turn it around to see it in sun and shadow and make sure we get it just right before they put it up on the whole building.
Great idea. Excellent. Thank you for that update.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the commission? Would someone like to put forward a motion? Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move to approve the project as presented. I have a question after that, but after we get a second, I'll ask my question. Thank you.
Any conditions or recommendations with that motion or as presented?
There was going to be a question, but it could be part of the motion. Is a question for Dawn. If, assuming the motion passes, is that sufficient, or should we actually provide comments to zoning and appeals in support of the zoning change? So that was my question.
Mr. Strickland, I believe that would be helpful. It's always good to have the commission's support explicitly spelled out when we approve a project like this. So I think that would be appropriate in this case.
All right, so I would add that to my motion, recommending approval of the project with a letter of support to the Board of Zoning Appeals for the zoning change.
Thank you for adding that, Mr. Strickland. Do we have a second? Mr. Brancatelli?
Yes, I second that motion.
All right, thank you. So a motion and second. Any further discussion? Don, are you clear on the recommendations? And
yes, I am clear. And I would just make a comment that to ask the applicant to notify staff when the mock-ups are done, so that we can review them and weigh in on them.
We can do that. Thank you.
So we have a motion to approve with the addition of a letter of support to the Board of Zoning Appeals for the zoning change, and to keep staff apprised of the installation of mock-ups.
perfect. Excellent. Thank you.
Great.
So a motion, we have second. Any further discussion?
Carl has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Carl. I'm sorry. Thank you, Carl. Question?
I just want to make sure that a tree preservation plan needs to probably be reviewed with the city arborist in this case as well, to make sure that that is prepared for them for review.
Our landscape architect is in the process of preparing that information. We just received a tree survey and a health condition of the trees on the site, and so they're in process. And they've been in touch with, I think it's Jennifer Kipp.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dreyer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
That concludes our certificates of appropriateness. We'll now move on to administrative reports. Carl or Don, any reports for us today?
I don't think I have anything today, unless Carl has something that I've forgotten.
I think we've both forgotten everything, so if we have.
Any site visits we should be aware of, or none in the works at this time?
We have a potential demolition on Laureen Avenue of a structure staff has walked through it. We think it's very compromised. It's lost much of its integrity. Depending on how we handle that demolition, we may ask the commission to take a look at it in the next couple of weeks, just to be aware that that's coming down the road. But I think that's the only thing that's on my calendar.
There is another one in the Grantwood Allotments, but that's a city demo, and we have to make some clarifications on that, on how we're moving forward on city demolitions at this time.
I guess I should make the commission aware that we will, in the very near future, be reviewing the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Court building on East 22nd Street, and it will more than likely be a demolition request. And I will keep the commission apprised on when that comes through. But we will have to do a site visit there. It's going to be, in my opinion, a huge loss, but I just want you to know that that's coming down the pipeline.
All right. Well, we'll keep our eyes open for that. I'm not as familiar with that building. I'm trying to find it to familiarize myself. Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Anything else that we need to discuss today?
Quick question. Do you have an address of the site on Laureen Avenue? And if not, that's fine. But
I should. It's just I don't have it handy. It's a building. I believe it's at the end of West 53rd Street, where 53rd Street intersects with Laureen.
52nd?
Maybe it's 52nd. An automobile crashed into the building.
Oh, I'll be able to find
recently,
it.
and so it's been even further compromised with that accident. I'll get you the address
Thank you.
after the meeting. You're welcome.
Madam Chair, just a quick point of personal privilege.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Just want to thank the commission members. It's great to see these exciting projects, and going back to the very first project on Fairview Court. I have a lot of history going back along that section of in Little Italy, and not going back to the German pig farms when I got the street, Piggy Street, but that one building that's now being renovated, going back late 60s, early 70s. It's great to see these projects and the development of that section, but it's great to see the great work you guys are doing here on Landmark. So thank you very much.
Well, the word is now we will do here on Landmarks, right? Since you're part of the overall commission. So, we're very happy to have you join us and to continue to expand the commission so that we're balanced in all the different areas. One last question that I wanted to ask, Don, have you set an official date that we should be aware of since we're almost on May 1st?
I should have, but I still haven't. I guess I'll tell you that I'm shooting for June 30th or 31st. I don't know how many days are in June. So my retirement would begin on July 1st, but that's still pending submission of all the paperwork. So I will let you know once that's a firmer date.
All right, as long as it's not June 1st, that's good. We're pushing it out.
I'm doing my best to push it out.
I thought the city put the franchise tag on him. He can't go anywhere.
I second that.
All in favor? No. So excellent. Okay, well, everyone, I hope you have a great day and a great week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks at our next meeting. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye,
Take
everybody.
care.